heart of San Diego. A living history of this area is told by the men and women who help shape our community. The Heart of San Diego is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, locally owned and operated with safety, strength, and performance. Hello, and it's nice to see you. I'm Fred Lewis, and this is The Heart of San Diego, a living history of this community as told by significant San Diegans. And today we explore the story of PSA, Pacific Southwest Airlines, with one of its founders and one of its first flight captains, Captain Leo Leonard. He is our guest. He's one of the early investors in and founders of Pacific Southwest Airlines, who made PSA's first flight, San Diego to Oakland, in 1949. Leo was PSA's Director of Flight Operations for 15 years. An airline transport pilot examiner for the FAA, he was a retired major in the Air Force Reserve who flew in the South Pacific during World War II. Leo was also one of the founders of Grossmont Bank. So good to have you here.
Thank you.
Leo Leonard. Captain Leonard, okay, born in Iowa in 1919. Tell us about your childhood there.
Well, I was just a farm boy, born in Cedar Rapids and went to Franklin High School. And my father was attorney there in Cedar Rapids. And I got involved in flying at a young age, and the big inspiration for me was when Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic.
So you were about 8 years old when that happened, and you must have been excited by the whole thing.
Yes, I was.
And you decided at that time you were interested in becoming a pilot?
Yes, I did.
That's interesting. What else did you do in high school? Was that your primary interest, or did you?
Well, no, I played football, and I was also a speed skater. And I did quite well, I think, in speed skating. I won the local silver skates several years, and I traveled with the speed skating team to Chicago and Minneapolis in the wintertime, and I really enjoyed that sport as well as the football.
You went to Brigham Young University after you graduated in 1938 for 1 year.
Yes, I went there as just a preparation course for going into the Air Force.
And then you came to San Diego. Why? About 1939.
Yes, well, I came to San Diego because my brother had came out and joined the Marine Corps in San Diego during the Depression in 1929. And my father passed away when I was in the 11th grade in high school, and we had 2 farms in Iowa, and my brother loved San Diego, and after he got out of the Marine Corps, he went to work for Convair right when it first moved from Buffalo to San Diego.
But at that time it was called Consolidated, right?
That's right, Consolidated Aircraft.
And he helped you get a job there?
Yes, he had a job waiting for me when I arrived from Cedar Rapids.
But your primary interest was not being a mechanic at Consolidated. Your primary interest was flying.
Yes, that's true. And my brother located a flying club that I joined right after I got to San Diego, and I joined this club, and the club owned the airplanes, and we had a 40 horsepower Cub and this Waco INF, and I got most of my time in the Cub aircraft because we could fly it for $1.50 an hour, and that provided the gasoline. So I was interested in building up my time and getting my private license.
Well, that was the kind of aircraft you flew first.
Yes.
And what kind of work did you do at Convair, which was then called Consolidated?
Well, I was just a mechanic, and I worked in the experimental department.
That's the part I wanted to hear about.
And
what were they working on at that time?
It's
not classified anymore.
No. No, they were working on the B-24.
Right.
The experimental model of the B-24, the very first one.
So you went to flying school.
Right.
Did you get licensed at that time?
Yes, I got licensed in 1941. I got my private license at that time. And thank God to my mother. I was living with my mother and single, and at that time the Battle of Britain was really underway, and we hadn't entered the war at that time. The Clayton Knight Committee came through San Diego and recruiting pilots. And so a friend of mine, we both had a private license in roughly 100 hours. We took the flight test for the American Eagle Squadron, but one evening at the dinner table, my mother sat down and talked to me, and she said, "Son, I don't want you going over there." So I stayed on and went on to get my instructor's rating.
The war came, of course, and I'd like you to describe, of course, we're talking about December 7th, 1941. Right. You're working at Consolidated, and you are now licensed as a pilot. What was San Diego like in 1941, just before the war and when the war started?
Well, it was a great city before the war, and it still was during the war, but there was certainly a lot of changes when the war took place. One of the things it did, it limited, I was working toward my commercial and instructor's rating, and we could not fly commercially within 150 miles of the coastline. And it was very frightening because we had the large barrage balloons, we had a fighter squadron that came into Lindbergh Field on PT-39s, I believe, that was stationed there.
You had camouflaging right over Convair
All of
Consolidated.
Convair was camouflaged. At night, yes. You had to drive with special lights on your automobiles, and you had to keep the lights in your house down to the minimum in the evening at night.
You were an FAA instructor of light aircraft around that time, just before you went into the service.
Yes, before I went into the service, the service put me through a flight instructor's course, and I became a light aircraft flight instructor called in the CPT, Civilian Pilot Training Program.
San Diego was a 24-hour-a-day town. It had to been a lot of shifts at the factories, of course, the aircraft factories, Consolidated, and sailors moving in and out of town. In a way, exciting, maybe the wrong kind of excitement, but an exciting place to be.
Well, it was. There was a lot of Navy and Marines and some Air Force, but not too much Air Force.
Well, tell us about your Air Force duty from 1942 to 1946. You flew the big 4-engine jobs. Tell us about your service, what you saw and what you did.
Well, I went into the service, and at the time I went in, I had my flight instructor's rating, and I'd been in the reserve as a flight instructor, but I wanted to go on active duty because I wanted to get into the military and fly bigger and better airplanes. If I'd have stayed where I was, they would have kept me there, but I would have been just instructing all my life, and I wanted to get more big aircraft experience. So I went through the cadet training program, really. I went through basic training and through primary, basic, and then advanced training, and then they sent me to a B-26 transition, and after I completed that, they sent me to B-24 transition. And then they sent me overseas just before, or right after I married my lovely wife, and I went overseas into a C-54. It was a troop carrier outfit that was attached to the 20th Air Force. And we were flying medical servicemen from Manila back to the United States and out of Tokyo to Manila. And so I was in the South Pacific flying C-54s mostly during my overseas time.
When you get out of the war, you join very quickly, I believe, Ken Friedkin and his wife in a flying school in San Diego.
Yes, how that happened, I got out of the service, and the wife and I came back to San Diego, and I needed a job, and I went to the Flying Tigers airline, who had a contract for flying C-54s across the Pacific. And I took the flight test and passed it, and they hired me, but I didn't have an instrument rating. So they said, well, you go back to San Diego and get your instrument rating and then come back to Burbank and we'll put you to work. So when I went to San Diego, I met Kenny Freakin, who had just started the Freakin School of Aeronautics in San Diego.
And there's a picture right at Lindbergh Field, not too far from what we call the Rock at Convair, and now the Port District building on the upper left. And there is the Friedkin School on the lower right part of the picture there.
A terminal there too, you might.
Yes, and the terminal. Really historic shot that we're so happy you were able to bring. And this is one of the early planes that Ken flew, of course, and you instructed in.
That was Kenny's first airplane, and he always considered that the seed. That is the airplane that got the school started and also continued on with the formation of the airline.
And the reason that Ken Friedkin is so significant in this story is I hold up a very big picture of he, his wife, and his son. And the reason he's so significant is that he is the man who had the concept for the Poor Sailors Airline, PSA. Tell us about that, Leo.
Well, not only that, but I've always felt that really the airline would have never been formed if it hadn't been for Kenny Freakin and Gene Freakin. And they started the airline on absolutely nothing. We tried to borrow money. We had located a DC-3 in Alaska for $20,000, and we went to the Bank of America to try to borrow.
There's another picture of Ken Freakin.
$20,000, and they just said, there's no way. They said, you people are got to be out of your mind if you think you're able to start an airline. So we were able to lease one. Luckily, we were able to lease one with no money down for $1,000 a month, and we had to provide the maintenance and the gas and the fuel and the crews.
I want to get into the founding of PSA as we continue on the heart of San Diego. My name is Fred Lewis. Our guest is Captain Leo Leonard for many years, 30 years, a pilot and chief pilot for PSA, and one of the founders of the airline with Ken Freakin, whose picture we have shown. That is the meat of our story on this issue of the Heart of San Diego, brought to you by Bank of Commerce. Bank of Commerce, San Diego's business bank for the highest level of banking excellence, and we appreciate your cards and letters to both ITV about the program and to the Bank of Commerce and the chairman of the board, Peter Davis, who is the executive producer of the program. We're here on ITV, and here is a picture of Captain Leo Leonard on an early flight, and we'll tell you about the first flight in a moment, with a little girl, and you flew this little lady up to Oakland, is that it?
Yes, it was a charitable flight for the girl and her father and so forth, and we took them to Oakland for some medical care that was needed in the Bay Area.
And I have another picture of Ken Freakin and some of the people who were part of the school and eventually the airline in the meeting.
That's Fergie Glythero, which was the first link instructor that Kenny had in the flight school, sitting to Kenny's left, and the gentleman to the right, everybody remembers him. He is J. Floyd Andrews. He was also a flight instructor in the school as I was.
And eventually he became the president.
That's correct.
Of PSA. And here's another gentleman who had a significant beginnings.
Yes, this is Captain Bud Plosser, and really Bud was the first captain on the first flight, and I was his co-pilot on that first flight to Oakland on May 6, 1949. And he was very instrumental in getting the airline off the ground.
Well, tell us about the Poor Sailors Airline, PSA, and the marketing tools that you used early on and the kind of prices there were from San Diego to the Bay Area?
Well, we picked up the name the Poor Sailors Airline because really for the first year or two, and mainly during the Korean War, we carried mostly servicemen. And to establish, to pick up passengers, why, what we would do is take a look at the evening paper on Friday and get the ships that were coming in port, that were going to be in port in San Diego over the weekend, where their home port for the ship was in San Francisco. So we would actually go down to the naval base when the sailors would get off the ship and sell them tickets to Oakland, and then we'd bring the same group back late Sunday night, because they had to be all aboard a ship Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And the fare at that time, it was $30 or $60 a round trip.
You also had to fly some mudsuckers for a while over to the Colorado River as the airline was being formed. Things were not always easy for everyone, were they?
No, we struggled. And this was happening just, prior to the airline starting. We were doing anything to make a dollar. We were towing signs, as you see today, around the stadium. Of course, the stadium wasn't there, but we'd tow them up and down the beaches when on nice days. And what I would do, I would fly these mudsuckers over to start at Needles and come down at all the fishing camps and sell the mudsuckers. And actually, it made a little money, not much.
Captain Leo Leonard, tell us about the different planes that we're going to see here in the era of PSA flying. We're showing right now the old DC-3s, I believe. There were 4 of them to start after a while.
Yes, we finally saved up enough money and made enough money to buy our first DC-3, and we bought it for $20,000. But it was a freighter, and we ourselves, my wife and Kenny's wife and Gene and J. Floyd Andrews and Hugh Wood and Fergie, we all worked on the interior of the airplane, and we actually put in our own interior, and it wasn't the best job in the world, but it got us started.
And then we're seeing some of the other planes.
The next airplane is the DC-4. We got our first 2 DC-4s from Capital Airlines. And
is that the Electrajet?
No.
No, let's go back up one.
Oh,
there we go.
This is the DC-4.
Yeah, there's the DC-4.
That's the DC-4. And I'd like to mention one thing, because Kenny and I went back to Chicago to pick up our 3rd DC-4 from United Airlines. We were going to buy it from them. And Kenny, you got to understand, when the airline first got started, the school was really supporting the airline. Mm-hmm. And the school bought a lot of the airplanes. So Kenny said, now, when we go back and buy this airplane from United, don't tell them that it's for Pacific Southwest Airlines. I'm buying it for freaking School of Aeronautics.
I hear you. Tell us, quickly about these other planes. That Electra.
Well, the Electra really was 98 passengers. The DC-4 was a big jump. It went to 70, and then we went to 98 in the Electra, and then we went into the Boeings, which were 175.
And then we're going into...
And then we went into the L-1011, which seated 350 people, and the top picture there on the right was the 737, which seated about 130 people.
And those are some of the planes that PSA used, of course.
That's all the planes.
Very promotion-minded was PSA. This is a 25th anniversary edition, and there's so many stories about and the attractiveness and the kind of uniforms that the stewardesses used, but we'll flash quickly by them. And this is how we started in the way of uniforms at PSA. We're looking at the lower pictures now, Leo.
Okay, do you want me to?
Well, just tell us what we're looking at,
Well,
and we'll gradually switch up to where we come to the mini-skirted era,
right.
the J. Floyd Andrews era.
Right, that's correct. And Kenny and we always felt that the flight crews were a very important part of the PSA product, because really the flight crews had the passengers aboard their airplane from anywhere from an hour to a 3-hour flight. So we were really the ambassadors for the airline.
And these are the pictures of the uniforms in the first 25 years of PSA,
Right.
leading to the mid-70s about. And of course, the stewardess has got a tremendous amount of publicity, and I knew some of these women, like Charlene, who's on this picture, Parade magazine.
Well, PSA was always known as having very attractive stewardesses. In fact, you know, when the airline first started with the stewardess got married while she had to leave, because
Yes.
we felt that housewives didn't make very good airline
That was a
stewardesses.
1968 picture, and then we have one of the picture of Captain Leo Leonard.
Yeah, this is holding a Boeing 727, which I retired in, and I flew for about 15 years.
Leo, what did you folks do right at PSA, and what could you have done better?
Well, the things that we did right, I believe, is that we made the passenger feel at home, and it was more than just a flight aboard the airplane. We would always talk to our passengers over the public address system.
And you asked them to fill out forms like this, too.
Well, this was a form that we filled out in the early days before we had the public address system.
Oh, yes.
And we would fill this out and just pass it back amongst the passengers. But we had fun, and we made sure the passengers had fun aboard the flights. And lots of times we would, for example, we'd land at L.A., and I guess I kind of picked up the nickname as a singing passenger, because when we'd land at Los Angeles, before landing I'd say, well, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to land in Los Angeles, and before we leave, I'd like to leave you with this. And I'd say, so long for a while, it's all the flying for a while. Have a nice day in L.A. We thank you for flying PSA. And
No, those were good days, and
Yes.
then there was one tragic day in 1978.
yes, this was terrible.
Leo, we don't have a lot of time. Could you give us about 30 seconds about this death toll, which was over 150 people when the PSA flight
Yes,
went down into an area just east of, I guess, what you call East San Diego, North Park.
we lost 34 of our employees, pilots, stewardesses. and
Many of
pilots.
them were deadheading. It was a Monday.
That's correct. And it should have never, this accident should have never happened, because what they had was our airplane landing to the west, while another light aircraft was taking off and proceeding eastbound. So it was a collision that they shouldn't have ever permitted this type of a departure or arrival.
37 PSA employees, and you certainly lost some good friends in that terrible
Yes, and
crash.
I'd like to say that at this time, why we feel that these people gave more than a lot of people, because they gave their life in the line of duty, and it's sad.
Leo, the combination of San Diego and PSA, it fit together, didn't it? Can you talk about that for 30 seconds or so?
Well, yes, you see, San Diego was, for the first 25 years, San Diego just flew within the state of California.
PSA did, yes.
Yes, PSA. So we were an interstate airline.
Right.
And everybody, I mean, businessmen felt, you know, there was just a big family, and they were part of PSA. And we did very well. San Diego, we flew to LA, Burbank, Ontario, and then Long Beach, and up to Sacramento, and over to Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose. So for 25 years, we were just operated like a streetcar between those cities. In fact, you see, when we started, Kenny said, look, we're in competition with the railroads and the buses. And literally, the railroads, you know, for about 8 or 9 years stopped passenger service between San Diego and LA, because we were carrying the passengers up there for start out with for $5.
The sale to U.S. Air was a negative, wasn't it?
Yes, very much so. That was a sad thing, and I feel so bad because everybody lived in San Diego. It was their home, and it was San Diego's airline, and now it's gone.
Who is Leo Leonard?
Well, I like to feel that I'm just a hard-working farm boy from Iowa. I always tried to lead by example, and I was very much a family man, and very proud of my lovely wife for 53 years. I had 2 sons. I had 1 son and 1 daughter that are still very active. The daughter in doing triathlons, and my son is racing on weekends in outrigger canoe. And today is Lisa's birthday, and I just want to wish her a happy birthday.
What do you deeply believe in?
Well, I deeply believe that if a person makes up his mind, he can accomplish anything that he so desires.
And Leo, we have 10 seconds. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I'd like to be remembered as just a hard-working man that I've enjoyed every minute of my flying career, and I just sorry that I had to retire at age 60.
His name is Leo Leonard, Captain Leo Leonard. I'm Fred Lewis. This is The Heart of San Diego, brought to you by Bank of Commerce and ITV. We'll see you soon.
Videotapes of this program are available to area schools and colleges, and to you, the viewer, by calling 232-2096. The Heart of San Diego is a regular feature of ITV, San Diego's learning channel, and is brought to you by Bank of Commerce for the highest level of banking excellence.